Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial on how to beat Rainbow Summit. Rainbow Summit is a scenario in the expert category in the base game of RCT2. The goal is to get at least 2500 guests and a park rating of at least 600 at the end of year 4. The map consists of a lot of hills with a little bit of flat land and a lake in the corner. Every bit of land is covered in trees. You start out with some path, a fairly large wooden coaster, a tram ride, a chairlift that goes up the hills, an information kiosk and about 280 guests. The ride selection of this park is nothing short of amazing. You have some transport rides, almost every gentle ride, a lot of amazing coaster types, some great thrill rides, a few awesome water rides and way too many stalls. You can get some extra rides with research, but you start out with so many rides that this is just a waste of money. Despite this amazing ride selection, I do consider this to be the most difficult scenario in the base game of RCT2. The goal is the same as the goal of Fungus Woods, which isn't super hard in itself, but it's the large number of additional challenges that make it difficult. You have very little flat land, which forces you to either build over water, build up the hills or build underground, all of which are expensive. The land is also covered in trees, the removal of which does add up over time. On top of this, there are two restrictions in this scenario. The first one is that you cannot build above the tree height, which is 10.5 meters or 35 feet. This makes constructing coasters a bit more difficult and raising the land so that you can go higher is expensive. Some taller flat rides, like the haunted house, are just flat out impossible to build above ground because of this restriction. The second restriction is that you cannot advertise. Advertising is by far the best way to get extra guests, so not having that available makes the scenario a whole lot more difficult. Without advertising, we need to build enough rides to attract 2500 guests naturally, which requires a lot of rides. Before we build anything, I'm going to explain what the soft guest cap is. Every ride type contributes a certain value to this soft guest cap. A merry-go-round contributes 45, a splash boat contributes 65, a wooden coaster contributes 105 and so on. If the number of guests in your park is above this soft guest cap, the guest spawn rate is reduced by a factor of 4. This means that if we want the best chance to get enough guests in time, we want to have a soft guest cap that is higher than 2500. The most a single ride can contribute to this value is 120, so we need quite a few rides, especially considering that most flat rides only contribute about 40 or 50. Advertising ignores this soft guest cap, which is why it is so powerful. Now it's time to actually start the scenario. The first thing that you want to do is get rid of the tram and the chairlift, as they're both more of a hindrance than a benefit. The tram is placed in a very annoying position because it makes connecting path from the lake to the existing path on the shore way more difficult than it needs to be. The chairlift is even worse, as guests can get trapped and lost on the path on the top of the mountain. When you delete the chairlift, don't forget to grab any guests that are stuck on the top and place them on some other path in your park. The next thing that you want to do is place 5 tiny corkscrew coasters near the entrance of the park. These are all 2 station pieces followed by a half corkscrew launched at 35 km per hour or 22 miles per hour. Don't forget to set all your rides to 10-minute inspection intervals, as this will make them break down a lot less. You can charge about 10 euros per coaster for the entrance, so now that we have 6 coasters we can charge 60 euros, which is the minimum amount of cash that guests can spawn with in this scenario. You don't want to charge more than this, as then some guests won't be able to get into the park. We also got a nice head start on the soft guest cap, which is now 605. 105 for the woody and 100 for each corkscrew. You could go and build another 20 of these tiny corkscrew coasters in a nice grid of path and get the guest cap high enough that way. That is a viable strategy, but I want to do it in a slightly more interesting way. instead of just spamming that tiny corkscrew, we are going to build a variety of rides, although most coasters will still be quite small designs. Before we are going to build those rides, we are going to do 3 things. First, we're going to build a few stalls. We already have an information kiosk, so all we need is a food stall, a drinks stall, a toilet and a cash machine. You can also add some additional stalls like the balloon stall or the first aid room if you like. Secondly, we're going to build lots of benches and bins on the path, as benches reduce the nausea level of guests and thus reduce the amount of vomit in your park, and bins reduce the amount of litter in your park. And lastly, we are going to hire some staff. For now, 5 handymen and 2 mechanics is enough. As you build more paths and more rides, you should hire more handymen and mechanics. It's a bit hard to say how many handymen you exactly need, but as long as there isn't super much vomit in your park and you don't have more than 50 when you're done, you're probably at a reasonable amount. For mechanics, you can either use a rule of thumb for about 5 rides per mechanic, or you can hire more when you notice that they cannot keep up with the 10-minute inspection intervals anymore. Now we're ready to start building the rest of the rides. The rides you build shouldn't be too large, as then you can run through all your money really quickly. A large corkscrew coaster attracts the same number of guests as a small one, so building a €20,000 coaster doesn't really add anything besides how cool it looks. It's best to keep your coasters under €10,000. Don't be afraid to take out a loan if you run out of money. You can borrow up to €60,000 in this park, which is a lot, and it's a waste to not take that money and invest it in the park. You may notice that as I am building my path, I make lots of small loops and I never have dead ends. By doing this, you minimize the chance of guests getting lost. I also have every queue line connect to a main path and never have an exit path longer than a few tiles. If you absolutely need a long exit path, it's best to block it with a no entry sign. As you're building and expanding your park, don't forget to periodically build some more stalls in different areas in your park so that guests don't have to walk very far to buy some food or go to the toilet. Also, don't forget to place some benches and bins on any new path that you build. Since there is a park rating requirement for the goal and your guest generation is influenced by your rating, you should keep an eye on it during your playthrough. If it gets below 800, it is a good idea to take a look at what might be the cause for that. Some possible causes are overcrowding, in which case you should build more paths, excessive vomit or litter, in which case you should hire more handymen, guests getting lost, in which case you have likely trapped some guests or have confusing path layout, or vandalism, which is always caused by another issue, likely one of the aforementioned ones. That is pretty much everything there is to it. Build small rides, build a simple path layout and keep your park rating high. Here is my finished park. You can see that I got more than enough guests and passed the goal with a very high park rating. If you want to take a closer look at the park, the save file is in the description. If you still have trouble with this scenario despite following this tutorial, don't hesitate to ask me about it on Twitter or on Discord. I will happily take a look at your park to see what's wrong. That was it for this tutorial. If you want a tutorial for any scenario that wasn't in my top 5 hardest scenario video, let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching and I will see you in the next video.